Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth and final of the PennSave 201 web conference series. I'm Rob Altenberg, and along with my co-host Marilyn Bagal, we're going to continue our nuts and bolts review of the performance contracting process. For those who missed our earlier sessions, videos will be available at pennsave.org. Last week we focused on the procedures, on the contracting procedures in the construction process. And this week we're going to be wrapping up our discussion with a talk about measurement and verification. As a reminder, our live audience can ask questions using the chat box at the right of the screen, and those watching the recorded version can send questions to info@pennsave.org. Last time we walked through the process of the investment grade audit, or the IGA, and then moved into issues of financing and actual construction. Now we're going to assume that the project has been completed and you'll be seeing the benefit of the energy savings. Since your ESCO is guaranteed projected energy savings and you're relying on those savings to cover the costs of the project, it's important that there's agreement on how you'll track those savings and measure success. Unfortunately, it isn't always just as simple as reading your electric bill at the end of the month. The ESCO might, for example, have guaranteed your lighting would be twice as efficient, but if you end up using those lights twice as much or make some other choice to use more power, one couldn't expect the ESCO to pay the difference. The guaranteed savings are going to be measured against a certain baseline, and that's going to consider some factors such as operational hours and use. In most cases, the site will achieve the guaranteed savings and everything will go as planned. But if you don't see the savings, the ESCO is going to want to find out the source of the problem. They're really on the hook to write a check if you don't see the guaranteed savings. So they're going to be interested in knowing, is there a problem with design? Was there a piece of equipment defective? Was something installed incorrectly? Do some settings need to be changed? There's a lot of things, aside from leaving the lights on longer, that could be a factor. And assuming it wasn't something that the customer caused, the ESCO is probably going to end up having to pay the difference or deal with whatever guarantees or warranties are in place to get this, the problem corrected. Now, what is M&V? We've talked about it as a foundation of the guarantee. But now we'll be getting into some more of the details. Here it is, the process of tracking and verifying projected energy savings. And it is important that that is as part of the contractual agreement. The planning for M&V, this is where you need to come to some sort of balance that's fair to both the customer and the ESCO. We need to know enough to be confident that things are working as planned, but every dollar spent on M&V is a dollar you don't have to spend on some additional capital improvements or a dollar you could have saved. So how much is enough is going to be a question that we're going to have to keep in mind through the entire planning phase. There are 4 steps listed here, and looking at the key risks is an important factor. Bigger parts of the project with higher projected savings are often going to have more potential risk. But we also need to consider the technology that's involved. A system that has to be adjusted by hand, may be easily misconfigured, where other components are less susceptible to problems. So we need to keep an eye on focusing our M&V dollars in the places that are likely to be most effective. Once we know what we're looking at, we also need to nail down that baseline. This is also another issue where we need enough information, but we don't want to spend too much money gathering it. Certain basics like hours of operation, fuel or power consumption, heating degree days, etc., probably easy to obtain, where there are cases where individual measurements of load on specific pieces of equipment can be difficult and expensive to obtain. We'll talk more about actually implementing the monitoring in the next slide, but the last step, reporting, is something else to consider. And this is another factor where there is a balance to be had. How often you need the reports, how much information is in the reports, versus the time and expense in the report preparation is something that we'll need to keep an eye on. Now, speaking about the specific M&V options, one thing we've not made clear is that M&V isn't a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. It can and should be specific to each ECM. And because it will impact the ultimate cost of the projects, it needs to be something that's selected during the IGA and finalized as part of the contract. The actual measures may be specified in the context of the listed International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, the IPMVP options that we'll discuss here, or they could be, or there are other similar standards that people could use in explaining the types of options that are available. Going through this list here, option A, partially measured retrofit isolation. Very long and confusing name, but this is where you possibly measure certain factors that you can isolate from the rest of the building and then stipulate other parameters. This is often done in the case of lighting, where you could measure the power draw, for example, but things like the hours of operation would be stipulated. Now, those stipulated parts are issues that are obviously not going to be covered by the guarantee, by the ESCO's guarantee. This is a mutual agreement where you are saying in advance, these are the we will agree without further measurement and without further cost that this will be the hours of operation. Option B, retrofit isolation, is where you measure all of the parameters in isolation from the rest of the building. This is particularly common in issues like variable speed drives or things that are weather dependent, where the actual efficiency improvement that you're seeing could easily be hidden by external factors. This may be one of the more expensive and time-consuming options, but for some things this is the more accurate way to document the usage. Option C, whole building. This is pretty much what it sounds, where you look at utility meters or maybe sub-meters to evaluate the performance of the entire building as a whole. This may be the best option if it's too difficult or too expensive to use option B, where you're isolating all those specific pieces of equipment. But this whole building look is only going to be practical if the projected savings are relatively large compared to the normal variations that you're going to see in energy use, or else you're just not going to get an accurate picture of the savings you have. Moving on to option D here, calibrated simulation. This is where you effectively are using computers to model the impacts. Now, the modeling might seem like the opposite of measurement and verification, and in some respects that's true, but it does have a role to play. Most often, this will be the case in new construction where you don't have a baseline established, or when effects from different ECMs impact each other. So measuring them independently isn't going to give you the kind of information you need. Now, all of these options are on the table at the beginning when you're looking through the IGA and going through the process, and working with your ESCO, you'll help to narrow down what options there are, keeping in mind the different prices for the option. But ultimately, the decision about how much to spend on verification is going to come down to the customer. With that, I'll hand it over to Marilyn to go on to discussing measurement and verification services.
Good morning. We're going to talk about some services for measurement and verification. I'm just going to go through these few things, and then we're going to go into it in a little more detail. Providers for M&V services, most normally is the ESCO that does the project. There are third-party providers for M&V out there. It's the decision of the customer. You may have preferences. I have a preference of letting the ESCO do the measurement and verification. They have done the project. They want to back up their guarantee. they have a contract with you. So I prefer it myself, but it is the customer's decision on who does the measurement and verification. One of the things you want to look at when you're talking about measurement and verification is continuous commissioning. I think it's important to have continuous commissioning as an ECM in your project. For this reason, if you're putting, well, depending on your ECMs, but if you're putting in new systems or controls, you want to be able to make sure that you're changing settings, that everything is being done as seasons change. If you have completed a new system in a project in July, and now it's the end of October, you are changing into a new season, you're going to change the settings on those systems. To ensure that your savings is persistent, it's a good idea to consider continuous commissioning where everything is kept going efficiently. The other thing with it is if you're not seeing your savings, you've got that recommissioning to be done during your project. The other thing about M&V services is your time period. And what I mean by that is if you have a 15-year project and you're guaranteeing the savings for 15 years and you're measuring and verifying for 15 years, I have seen some projects, now again depending on the ECMs of your project, after you've gone through 7 years of monitoring and obtaining your savings, you want to go through 7.5 more years of paying for that measurement and verification. Are you satisfied? Now, the only thing to remember here is that once you stop the measurement and verification, your guarantee goes away. Remember that measurement and verification is the foundation of your guarantee. So it's a thing to consider, and I have seen some 10-year projects where the ECMs are kind of simple, and after a couple of years, the customer is saying, I don't need to pay for this measurement verification anymore. I'm obtaining my savings and I'm satisfied. So it's just something to look at and something to consider. Reporting of the M&V. The customer needs to know and understand the report. It doesn't do you any good for the ESCO to give you a report that you don't understand. And they say to you, okay, you're obtaining your savings, and you look at the report and you can't see it, or you don't understand why they're saying it. So you need to request a reasonable understanding of that M&V report. How often you get the report? Most of the time it's annual. That can be negotiated, but remember, measurement and verification services cost money, and it is a separate check. After they start the measurement and verification services, you write a check for those services, and it is included in the savings, but it is not included in your payment to your funding institution. Okay, Rob. There are some benefits and some risks to measurement and verification. The benefits, of course, you can accurately assess energy savings per project. This is a great benefit. You know you're getting your savings. Then there is verification that the savings guarantee is met. No one has problems. It's in the contract. Here's your verification. You have gotten your savings. Our guarantee is met. You may find additional savings over the term of the project by doing this measuring, verifying. I don't know how much you would find, but there may be some additional savings there, or you may see some, because of your measuring and verifying, you may see additional savings in those reports that predicted originally. The other thing is the risks are allocated to the appropriate parties. You're measuring and verifying. The risks are allocated that if you don't obtain your savings, that your service provider needs to write the check. But there also are risks on your side because that contract is going to state that the customer needs to do these things to keep the guarantee, and the ESCO needs to do another list of things to keep the guarantee. If the customer doesn't keep up with maintenance or maintenance schedules, there could be a problem with your guarantee. So make sure that you know what your risks are and what your benefits are of that M&B decision. There are, of course, risks. You can select the wrong option. We talked about, Rob talked about the options, and the first option, option A, which is a stipulated option, which means that, and it's usually lighting, and it means that, you know, you took out P12s, you put in TH, you're saving 4 watts for this many hours a day. Here's what your savings is going to be. And option A said, yes, I agree with you. We will get those savings. So it's stipulated. And that's great for lighting. It's not for controls. Don't put in option A on controls. You want to make sure that you have the right option because you're not getting measuring and verifying with option A in majority of the instances. You can do a lot for the proof that you're saving. One of the things I always said was don't pay $10 to prove that you've saved $1. So really look at those options and the costs of them. If you need option C, then to prove that you've gotten your savings, then definitely put it on there. But if there's, you know, if you can add in making sure you're monitoring your bills and your maintenance people are monitoring the systems, take a look at the cost of those options. And then you have to look at your staff maintenance capabilities, because in the contract there will be a list of things that you need to do with this new equipment. Now, most places have their own maintenance people and they take care of the equipment that's been installed. Some customers have to hire maintenance companies to do that. So you need to take a look at what's in the contract that says, in order to maintain this equipment, this is what needs to be done. Does your staff have maintenance capabilities to do that? Now you want to take a look at what needs to be done against your staff capabilities and the cost. Is paying for a maintenance company to come in to do this, plus the measurement verification cost effective? So there are things to measure against, and there are risks to M&B services. All right. Understanding performance. And here's a couple of things that I just wanted to go over real quick with you. the data collection. You match your data collection to the M&V protocol. You need to know where that data comes from. Learn the source of your data. If you're collecting data and you're matching it with an M&V option, learn the source of where that data is coming from so you know what's being measured. Establish good monitoring practices. One of the things that can be done, and it's a simple thing, but it does help, is to review your utility bills. Because you may not get you may not be getting an M&V report only once a year. So if throughout the year you're monitoring your utility bills, you can definitely see if something changes. We had an instance in one project where they weren't obtaining their savings, and we were just frantic and watching because we were watching the utility bill. Well, we called the ESCO in, and what was happening was one of the pieces of equipment was not running efficiently. It was fixed real quick. It wasn't anyone's fault, but it was taken care of. But if you're establishing good monitoring practices, you can catch things, and it really does help. And then continuous and effective monitoring creates persistent savings. You don't want your savings going up and down all throughout the year because you're not monitoring. Because you can catch things. You can catch on your utility bills. You can catch on a system. If you're having monitoring done on your systems or utility bills, you can create that persistent savings because you can catch things quick. Again, I'm going to go over this right option. Your chosen option must be cost effective. Don't pay for things that it's not really saving you money. If you're saving money and you see it, you want the right option, and it needs to be cost effective. If you have an ECM that's saving you some, it's not a great amount of savings, but it is saving you some and it fit into the project, you don't want to pay a whole lot for that to be measured and verified. You want to produce consistent results, and that's your foundation of choosing your options. Again, reporting. Reporting by your M&V provider should be timely and accurate. And you should expect clear and precise explanations from providers. Again, I have seen some M&V reports that I had to ask a lot of questions to understand what it was saying. You want the bottom line, and you want it clear, and you want it precise, that you can look at it and say, I see that I'm getting my savings, or I see that I'm not getting my savings. The time of a report, they're usually annual. You can negotiate to have them more. Just remember again that measurement and verification services cost money. And remember again that it is a written check to your M&V provider aside from paying back your financial institution. So the savings will cover these costs, but it's still a separate check. So you just want to make sure usually that check comes out of a different budget or a different budget item. So I think that if you've seen the risk and you get the explanations, Your ESCO will help you. Remember, they are guaranteeing your project. They don't want to write a check for you. They want you to have a good project. If you need extra help or more research, there's a lot of information out there for measurement and verification, what you can, what options you should choose for what ECMs. There is a lot of information out there, and you know what your ECM is costing you. You know what your savings are, so you can figure really quick if this is going to be cost effective or not. Okay, Rob, I think that we may want to see if there are any questions.
Okay, yeah, once again, questions can be entered into the box on the right. I don't see any questions yet. Certainly, if you don't write the questions there, you can email questions to info@pennsave.org, and we'll be happy to answer them. While we're waiting, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this webinar series. This is the final week of this series, but the PennSave project is going to continue to be active. Encourage everybody to go to the PennSave.org website, sign up for mailing lists, and keep an eye on it to see what news and programs we have related to encouraging energy savings through performance contracting. Still no questions, so I'd like to thank everybody once again for attending, and we hope to see everyone at future events. Thank you very much.